Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with two very special guests. Our first guest today is Mark-Guerin, and he's here to share with us his new novel, You Can See More From Up Here. Mark is a graduate of Grub Street Novel Incubator, which is a program in Boston. He earned his MFA from Brandeis University and is a winner of an Illinois Art Council grant, as well as the Mimi Steinberg Award for Playwright and Eleanor B. North Poetry Award. He's a contributor to the novelist blog Dead Darlings and is also a playwright, copywriter, and journalist. So let's welcome to the show, Mark-Guerin.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book. I have to ask you, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, it's a family saga, and it's based on my own family. It's really based on the father-son relationship in my family. My dad was a pretty interesting guy. He was a colonel in the Air Force during World War II. He was a MASH doctor before there was MASH doctors. As you know, the movie and the TV show are set in Korea, but he was actually in New Guinea, setting up and taking down hospitals in the jungle and treating men there. And so he was an interesting guy. He worked his way up to full colonel and a hospital commander. And then in 1965, he was forced to retire when he was only 55. So he had to find a new job. And being a doctor, and an Air Force doctor, he had some difficulty moving into private practice and into the civilian world. So he ended up working at a Chrysler plant in northern Illinois as the plant physician. So he was doing physicals and doing workers' comp claims. And for him, we could tell it was quite a demotion. It really changed him emotionally, and he was very unhappy. And we had to move to a small farming/factory community in northern Illinois. This plant that they built there was brand new, and it was really right in the middle of the cornfields there. And so there's a lot of farming going on too. And I learned how difficult the job was for him when I took a summer job there my first summer after my first year in college. And I heard wisecracks from some of the workers about how difficult he was to get along with, sort of being that tough military guy that he was. And I even suspected that I was given some not so nice jobs as a sort of way to get back at him. And I always thought it was sort of an interesting situation, wondering what it was about him and the workers and that whole problem of him moving to this small town, that I always thought that was an interesting story, especially the way it affected our family. It's really more of a family saga about how his evolution and through life came to make him very unhappy, and how unfortunately he took it out on his family, and he started drinking and he became abusive. So I always thought that was an interesting situation. I always wanted to write about it. So that's basically the setup of the book. From that point on, the book is basically fiction. There's a lot of fictional characters, but there's a lot of stories that are based on him and his past and on my mom. I have 6 siblings, and I didn't use any of them because I didn't want to talk about them and their lives and their feelings about my dad. So it's really, really focused on my relationship with him and my speculation about how he got to where he was and how our relationship sort of evolved to the place it got to.
You have written that so well, and the way that you portray your father, he is a very interesting character. You pick up the book and you don't want to put it down.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And so I'm really curious, the title of the book, You Can See More From Up Here, where'd that come from?
Well, it's actually supposed to be taken ironically. So we're obviously on radio, so people can't see the cover, but the cover of the book depicts a house on a hill looking down at a river, and across the river there are some what look like cabins, and it's actually a migrant camp, or a campground that's been moved into by a number of migrants. So there was a number of migrant workers who came to this small town that we lived in during the summers up from Mexico to help Green Giant pick their corn and detassel their corn and pick their peas, and then they worked in the canning factory. And slowly over the years, they started moving into town. And in my book, I created this fictional camp across the river from the house. And in reality, what happened, there was a foundry across the river from where we lived. And my father planted these willow trees to hide the factory. But I always thought it was funny that he sort of justified why he bought this house. It was the biggest house in town, by saying you can see more from up here than you can anyplace else in town. And yet he covered it all up. It covered the view up by planting these trees and hiding what was on the other side of the river. And I always thought that was sort of ironic, his take on the world, that he felt sort of in this privileged position, and yet he sort of hid from it, and he sort of tried to hide it from his family, the way the rest of the world worked. So the title sort of reflects on that sense of privilege that he had, and yet the fact that he wanted to hide the rest of the world from us, the less fortunate or the working class people that we had to deal with. And it was when I came in contact with them in the automobile plant that I really became familiar with how that half of the world worked, and I became much more sympathetic to them. So that's sort of the basis of the title.
Well, it's interesting how perspectives are. I mean, you look at it and your dad planting these willow trees and blocking the view, but he's saying you could see more from up here. I mean, it
Exactly.
Really does kind of contradict itself.
Right, exactly.
Well, and you went into, in this book, I mean, there's so many great parts of it. You went into really great detail in regards to the factory and the characters. Why did you spend so much time on that?
I think that work is something that is for the large part ignored in a lot of our fiction these days, that a lot of the stories I read are about family sagas and relationships, but the bearing that work has on our lives and how it changes the way we behave. And especially in this situation, the struggles my dad had working in a plant where he was doing a lot of workers' comp claims, and he was getting pressure from his bosses to keep costs down and not to hand out workers' comp. And he was getting pressure from workers in the plant to give them workers' comp because they felt that they were injured, and he was sort of caught in between. And it really took a beating on his family life. And so I think that work has a great bearing on the way we perceive the world and the way we behave. And so that's why I focus so much on the plant, because it really, a lot of the characters in the plant, there's a Mexican immigrant who works there, and the father of this protagonist's girlfriend, and there's a conflict between them. But a lot of it's about workplace jealousies and people who get promotions and those who don't, and just the struggle of trying to keep healthy, of trying to work day to day without your back going out, or people who have pre-existing conditions not being allowed to do certain kinds of jobs and so forth. So I just feel that work has a great bearing on our lives, and I wanted my novel to sort of reflect the importance of work in our lives.
You go into a great deal in, in regards to the culture. You talk about some of the Mexican immigrants. Did you feel like you were really opening yourself up to criticism by, including that?
I know that can potentially be a problem. And when I wrote this, I really just wanted to try and reflect the humanity of these people, how they're just trying to get along, that they're just trying to hold down jobs and feed their families and take care of their children and pay their rent and better themselves, and that's why they move into town. And I knew that there might be the potential of there being criticisms about that, so I tried to avoid dealing with any cultural issues that people might say I didn't really understand. I just really wanted to deal with their day-to-day lives and focus on what it is to try to survive as a human, regardless of where you come from or what country or background or culture or ethnicity you have, that all of us are just trying to get along and to maintain lives and families and hold down a job. And that's really the way I focused on these characters, was just to work with that and to reflect on how I think that most people try to function in the world, what their priorities are. And it's very simple, just, feeding your family and keeping a job. And I think that's a top priority for anybody in the world.
Well, we're not going to go into great detail about the book because it is a fiction book and we don't give books away here. Excuse me.
Right.
So we're not doing that. But what would you like to share, for our listeners in regards to the book itself? I know we've gotten to quite a bit. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I guess what I feel about the book is it being sort of semi-biographical. It's very sort of close to my heart. And I felt as I was writing this that I was perhaps getting more at the truth of relationships than I had in other books that I was writing. And, some people ask me, what can other writers learn from reading my book, or what advice would I have for other writers based on this book? And what for me was the big discovery was that it was such a revelation to write about myself and my family, and in a way creating a protagonist who was able to confront his father in ways that I personally in my own life never was able to. And, I felt that was quite cathartic, that it was quite a revelation to be able to deal with those emotional issues through the book. So, that's the advice that I have for authors when they ask about writing semi-biographical novels. And I think that comes through in the novel, that you really get a sense of the reality of the kind of relationships that can develop under these circumstances.
So let's talk about your writing process. What does that look like? Are you a person that writes every day in the morning? What is it like?
I do write every day. Usually write 3 or 4 hours in the morning until I run out of gas. I'm not the kind of writer who plans out everything in advance. I don't have elaborate outlines or big plots. I try to sort of just know what's going on 10 feet down the road. I often use an automobile metaphor for how I write. It's like driving at night and having your headlights on. And as long as you can continue seeing road ahead of you on your headlights, then you can keep going. And that's sort of the way I am with my writing. I don't try to plan things out in advance. I just sort of have a general idea where I'm going. And I sort of keep moving along, driving along. And if I get lost, and sometimes I do, that's when I might resort to the quote unquote roadmap of a plot or of an outline to sort of figure out where I am and how to fix things. But I really like to work my way and push to the end of a draft before I think of making any big changes. And I did make some big changes to this book. It's actually got 2 timelines. It's set in 1974, and it's also part of the story is set in 2004. And I didn't really introduce the later timeline until after I'd completely written a draft set in the earlier timeline and found out that it wasn't working, that people were having trouble with that, and that by having my character look back on his past, that people had more sympathy for him when they saw him as an adult, sort of reflecting on his past as a college student. But that didn't come until after I had completed a first draft and people had read it. And then I was able to sort of take it apart in the way some people work with outlines and plots, but I feel it's easier to work with a finished draft in that way of moving things around than it is to work with an outline, because I think a finished draft is sort of more alive. You sort of get a real sense of where the characters are living emotionally and what you can do with them at that point and what you can't do with them. Whereas in an outline form, I don't feel like you're as close to your characters as you are as when you have a draft. So I try to work through to the end of a draft, and then I get feedback from other writers, and then I'll make corrections, and then I'll make another draft. And so that's sort of my process in a nutshell.
Well, it sounds like you've got that down pat. And when it comes to choosing like how you're going to proceed with the publishing aspect, did you have already kind of an idea that you're going to be working with Golden Antelope Press?
No, I didn't. I mean, I approached this in the traditional manner, which is to send out query letters to literary agents and trying to engage them and to get with a bigger publisher. Golden Antelope Press is a small press. But there were several issues with that. I think the book is much longer than I'm told most publishing houses want a debut novel to be. My book is about 130,000 words, and most debut books are supposed to be around 85,000 words. So I think I had difficulty attracting an agent just because of that to begin with. And I didn't want to make a lot of changes. I met with an editor at a conference who also suggested that the market didn't really favor the kind of book that I was writing. That the vast majority of readers now are women who tend to like women's fiction or non-traditional writers or younger writers, and she suggested that I bypass the whole using an agent process and started looking at independent and small presses. So once I started doing that, I heard from Golden Antelope Press, which is actually run by a woman who is a retired college professor who's actually older than me. So she could relate to the story, the 70s story. And she didn't really have any concerns about the length of the book. She just recognized it as a good story and well written, and she wanted to publish it based on that alone. And, she's not so concerned about the marketability as she is about, making sure that people get a chance to read what she felt was a good book.
Well, reviewers think your book is an excellent book as well. So she was right about your book, and so are you. So
thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome, because it's gotten so many great reviews. I mean, we can't even touch all those. So I have to ask, what are you working on now? Because I know with writers, a lot of times, as soon as they finish one book, even though there's a process with having it out there and doing the PR for it, they're always kind of working on something else too.
Yeah. Well, actually, I have a finished book in the drawer that I've sort of been waiting until the process of launching this book is over, or at least at a point where I can sort of go back to that. And it's a dystopian novel. It's much different from this, and it came from the fact that I was doing some research on the Berlin Wall a couple of years ago, and thinking of writing a story set in that situation with East Germany and West Germany, and especially in Berlin, where a wall went up one night and people were separated. Family members were separated from each other, and there were these incredibly dramatic escapes over the wall and under the wall. And originally, I thought, I might do a novel set in that setting, and then it occurred to me it might be interesting to set the novel in the near future, and to imagine what it would be like if there was a wall running down Midtown Manhattan after the New England states had seceded from the rest of the United States. And so it's basically the story about two lovers who are separated by this wall, and one who's trying to help the other escape. And one of the interesting aspects of the book that's based on a true story is that during the Berlin Wall era, one of the American television networks actually helped finance one of the more successful escape tunnels. And there was a number of people who escaped going under the Berlin Wall, and due in no small part to the money that was provided by an American television network. And so I use that idea in my book too, that there's a cable news network who helps with the funding of this wall. So it's set in the future, it's sort of dystopian, based on sort of imagining what it would be like if the country were split in two, and if these two lovers were separated by this wall, and how they might get back together again, how one might help the other to escape. And it's called Escape from America right now. That's the working title.
Oh my goodness, I can't wait till that one's out. That sounds really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I have one final question about your book. Did you find that it was a little bit healing or cathartic to get that book out there?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, it was about a troubled time with my father, and you have a character who's basically sitting down trying to write out and understand a mystery that happened between him and his father, and to sort of deal with issues that they never really resolved. And I always felt that my father and I, in reality, had issues that we never really resolved, we never really talked about. And having my protagonist do that and confront my father in ways that I never could was very cathartic. It's sort of empowering, and it also sort of was healing too, because I think I tried to depict him in as sympathetic a manner as I could to try to understand what drove him to drink and why he was in this difficult situation, and trying to understand his past in the Air Force and how difficult it was for him to take this job in an auto factory. It was very cathartic, and it was very sort of educational for me to better understand what was going on with our family.
Well, Mark, where can our listeners connect with you and learn not just about this book, but your other books?
Well, I have a website. It's www.mark-guerin.com, and that's Mark with a K. And Guerin is hard to spell. It's Guerin, so mark-guerin.com. And there's, you can see my reviews on there. You can see some of my other writings.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
It was my pleasure. I enjoyed talking with you.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and, of course, to talk about your new novel, You Can See More From Up Here. Again, if you'd like to connect with Mark, you can at his website, mark-guerin.com, for more information. On that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
If not me, then who? This ethos is driving the Travis Manion Foundation to empower veterans and families of fallen heroes to develop character in future generations. In 2007, Marine First Lieutenant Travis Manion was killed in Iraq while saving his wounded teammates. Travis's legacy lives on in the 5 words he spoke before leaving for his final deployment. If not me, then who? Guided by this mantra, veterans continue their service, developing strong relationships in the community, and thrive in their post-military lives. Visit TravisManion.org and ensure the character of our nation's heroes lives on in the next generation. If not me, then who?
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with our next special guest, Dr. Krista-Driver, and she's here to share with us her new book, Pedi, a true life rags to riches story. Born to a teen mother and a child of the foster care system for 4 years before she was adopted, Dr. Krista-Driver started out as the epitome of the underdog. Today, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a doctorate in psychology, Dr. Driver has dedicated her career to working with the most vulnerable in our communities. As a CEO of a nonprofit counseling center that specializes in providing mental health services to women and children, Dr. Driver sees Pedi as a natural extension of her work. So let's welcome to the show Dr. Krista Driver.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You know, what a joy it is to have you here and to talk about this book. My goodness, I know a lot of people are really appreciating you having written this book.
You know, it was a lot of fun to write it, but the joy is coming now with it out in the world. And so I'm really excited about this project.
Oh, I bet. Well, before we go too far down the road, why don't you share with us, your story? What has inspired you during your journey?
Well, I spent the first 4 years of my life in foster care before I was adopted. So I kind of started out as an underdog, and I chose to overcome a lot of things in my life, a lot of obstacles. And when I was choosing a career path, psychology fit for me because I love to hear other people's stories, and I wanted to work with underdogs, and people who had obstacles to overcome themselves. And so in the clinical world for about the last 30 years is where I've resided as a professional therapist, and I'm now the CEO of a nonprofit counseling center, and we provide counseling services for vulnerable women and families who might not otherwise be able to afford the support. And again, it just comes from my lifelong love affair with hearing other people's stories.
I understand that. I mean, there's something to be said about the human spirit and being able to overcome obstacles and challenges that are presented in our way, because everyone's got a challenge.
Everyone does. That's true.
Well, and so, we've talked before and had some great discussions in regards to this book. For our listeners that are new to you, what inspired you to write Pedi? How did you even get that thread?
Well, it was kind of started with me going to my regular salon and getting a mani-pedi, and in just observing the people around me, I realized that I wasn't really noticing the technicians, and so I was curious why that was. And I also noticed that other customers weren't really paying attention to them as well. And so it just sparked my curiosity about who these women were, and I began to ask them about their lives. And the stories they began to share with me were so compelling. And I just felt the broader audience would like to hear these stories as well. So that's really how it started for me. And then I initially was going to do an anthology with multiple women's stories for the book. And I decided to do one woman's story. And that's how mani-pedi was born. And it really is not to underscore, the bigger impact of the Vietnamese women that started in this nail industry, but it's told through the story of one woman, Charlie Vo.
So Charlie, I mean, my goodness, when I read your book, it was heart-wrenching, inspiring. There's so many emotions that go with this. How was it just interviewing Charlie and talking to her about her journey?
It was fascinating. Charlie is this tiny little package, and she's just so powerful, and her story is very compelling and emotional. And we did a couple formal interviews with Charlie, and I got a lot of information from those interviews. But really, I got a lot of information when I talked to Charlie and Olivet together. And when they were sharing stories and memories of times in the salon is really where I got the most information about their journey together.
For our listeners that might not be very aware of Vietnam, I mean, during the time that Charlie was there, it was a communist-controlled country, right?
Correct. Well, in 1975, when Saigon fell, is when the communists came in, and she was in her early 20s when that happened. So Charlie describes her early life, her childhood, as happy and normal, and hanging out with her girlfriends and reading magazines and just and being free. So she did have that experience in Vietnam before the fall. But once the fall happened, then she lost all freedom under the communist government.
So how was it like for Charlie and her family to escape Vietnam?
Well, it's an extremely dangerous process. It was for many, many people. And for her, they had two attempts. The first time they attempted, they were actually caught and put into prison by the communist soldiers, and she describes that as just being a horrific experience. And the second time they were successful, and I do go into more detail in the book about what that process really was like for them. But the best way to describe it is just incredibly dangerous, and she risked everything for freedom in America.
Yeah, most of our listeners don't understand how difficult it is over there. There was a point when Charlie was captured that they were actually starving her children.
They were, and the children, lost a lot of weight, and Charlie described it as they lost the sparkle in their eye. They lost their will to be children, and I think that is just so incredibly poignant as we talk about what Charlie risked to come here. And really, her children had no future, but they also could have died under that communist government.
When we take some of these things for granted that people really are risking their lives to be a part of. And, I think we just have to take a moment and just really have great appreciation for what others are doing just to get here.
Exactly. And the human interest part of it, just that these were men and women and children that just wanted to be free. And so the risk was great. And Charlie does talk about when she got to America, she longed for home. She loved her country. It wasn't because they hated Vietnam. It was because they hated what their life was like in that country.
So what are some of the kind of general meanings that you'd like listeners and our readers to take away from your book?
I mean, some of the general messages I would hope people would take away is that these individuals, these Vietnamese refugees and immigrants that came here, nearly 500,000 of them came to America, and it was difficult for them to assimilate, but they did, and they worked hard and, provided for their families. But also that, with hard work and sheer determination, some of these women in particular built this nail industry, and that is an incredible feat. And it's inspiring that those of us who haven't maybe done something that grand or that big can still rise above whatever circumstances we have to achieve something. And it's really about a women's empowerment and entrepreneurship, and it's a great story, excuse me, for all of us to take heart and to know that we can do something with our lives as well.
Yeah, it's a real testament to the American dream and how anyone can accomplish it, because Charlie's actually done very well.
She has. And, if you met her, you wouldn't know that she has. She's just a regular, kind soul. And she's very philanthropic. She gives back. She's still raising money to send back to Vietnam for families there that are struggling.
So has she gone back to Vietnam? What is it like even going back to visit family?
She has gone back. She, still loves her country, and she does go to visit. It's not the same for her as when, she lived there. She did buy property and buy a house there, but because she was an American citizen, she wasn't allowed to buy it in her name. Mm-hmm. And so there's still some challenges with the government there, but she does go back to visit and really loves her country and her people.
What was kind of like the deciding factor for you in telling Charlie's story?
Well, the moment I met her, she's just so compelling. She's just soft-spoken and kind, and yet she's achieved so much. And it just breathed into me this courage and this bravery, and I wanted to be a part of that. And if you ever meet her, she's just a wonderful human being. And that was what really was a tipping point for me to tell the collective story through the story of Charlie.
What was your favorite part about writing this book?
My favorite part actually was the research that I did for the book. It was, learning about Vietnam and about the fall of Saigon and about, the government and the camps that she was in, and all the stuff that I did to put context to the story was interesting. And in addition to just to Charlie's story, but also the research I did about the nail industry really enlightened me about the history of nails and manicures and pedicures, and it was interesting, and I loved that part of it. Of course, meeting Charlie was ultimately the best part about writing this book.
Are those camps still in existence today?
I don't believe so, and I recently learned that there was one even closer to my house that I didn't even know about, and so now I'm just learning more and more about that time period, and it's interesting. I don't believe they're still in existence, no.
How does Charlie feel about you writing her story, and how does she feel about the book?
She's so excited. I mean, when I first started this project with her, I don't think she really understood that it was going to be a book about her. I think she thought it was just going to be a book about the nail industry. And so when she read the manuscript the first time, she was just so pleased and so happy and appreciative. And we actually have a book launch party coming up, and she's really excited to invite her friends and family to this party. And it's just beautiful to watch her also bringing memories that she hasn't thought about for a long, long time. And it's just a good experience.
It's got to be very exciting and heart-wrenching at the same time with everything she's gone through.
I think she's more excited that people are going to hear the story of the Vietnamese refugees that came over here and really maybe understand what they risked to come here and what they did to build a life here. I think that's a story that has never been told before, and it's time to tell the story. And I think that's part of her excitement about this book. It isn't just about her story being told, but really people understanding this, these Vietnamese refugees that came here and really influenced our culture.
Yeah. I mean, we look at, and I get it, because when we go to nail salons, there's not many people that actually connect with the people that are actually there providing the service, and
right.
To really kind of step beyond that, it's a big, it doesn't take a whole lot.
Yeah. It doesn't, and it's not a referendum on people that want to go and take a nap when they're getting a pedicure or read a book, and because sometimes I even do that. I just want some downtime, and so it's not a bad thing that people do that. I just wanted people to consider, maybe wanting to know more about these people as a whole, as individuals, and as women, and so I do know that some people like to go and read a book, and that's totally fine. But some people might be curious now to ask their technicians about their journey to America.
So what are you working on next? Because this is such a great book. I'm sure you're working on another one.
I am. Well, with this book, Pedi, we are possibly going to see it on the big screen someday in the future. So that project is in the works. And then I am now writing Olivette's story. So you may know from reading the book that it's Charlie's story, but we meet Olivette about halfway through Pedi and introduce her into the storyline as Charlie's partner in the nail salon. So my next book is Olivette's story, and it is powerful and fascinating. And I've been doing a lot of research for that book, and I'm just about ready to start writing. And I'm so excited about that book. So excited.
Well, Krista, where can our listeners connect with you, learn more about this book, and be part of your community?
Well, I do have a website. They're welcome to go on there. It is krista-driver.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. So lots of ways to get in touch with me. I will be updating the website with more information that comes out. We have a video that's going to be put on the website with Charlie and Olivette and myself just discussing this book and the journey that we took. So a lot of updates to come.
Well, Krista, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to talk to you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Driver. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you, and of course to talk about your new book, Pedi. Pedi is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and select indie retailers. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.